with that, we're going to finish out this season with one of our not only regular topics, but I think most important topics, which is media literacy. How do we keep up with the news that's happening here? And anyone who's been here, much less follows the news in Israel, knows how quickly it changes. Which is why it's important to follow along in Hebrew, because even if your Hebrew is not fluent, a lot more is covered for local consumption in Hebrew than obviously English and other languages. So it's important to at least know how to access news and how to read for relevancy and immediacy. And in that case, we're going to look at a news source we've looked at before in the past. They've undergone a massive change on their website. For good or for bad, I leave it up to you. I know I have my opinion on it. And we're going to look at it together because this is a great resource in general. And then before the top of the class, the end of the class rather, I'm going to not only answer your questions, I'm going to show you another news source that's related to what we're going to look at today, and talk about Wednesday's class. Again, highly encourage all of you to join. We have space for everyone to talk and listen about the topics we cover here today. So, as I said, we're doing media literacy. Let's get to it. So I'm reintroducing you to one of the most important resources there are out there for Hebrew learners, which is called Chadshon. Chadshon has been around now for many years. They recently were down in renovating this website. And for those, we've done previous lessons using Chadshon, and I know many of you use it in your other Hebrew classes or have just encountered it before. It's undergone quite a different look, right? This used to be a very colorful website with a lot of graphics and all sorts of other things. It is very stark right now, but it still accomplishes the main goal, which is, as it says here, Chadshon be'ivrit kala, meaning the chadashot, the news, be'ivrit kala, in easy Hebrew. And that's exactly what they do here. It's a daily digest of the headlines, usually published first thing in the morning. That's not just written out, but also narrated here at the top, and we're going to listen to it in easy Hebrew. And they've gone and made it even easier. We're going to look at an example of a headline where they, again, use Hebrew to teach you Hebrew. Because this website is not just headlines, it also gives you the weather at the top. Very important in Israel to know the weather. That not only influences things like what to wear, but also can you do laundry? Do you need to turn on your dud chashmal, or can you use the dud shemesh? Things we've talked about in the past. It now gives you the Parashat HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion. It then has a ma'agal katavot, a reservoir of articles based on topics. You can figure out by the pictures if you don't know the Hebrew. And on the left side, it has lexikonim. It has lexicons based on certain categories. So milim umusagim, words and phrases, and topics. Roshei tevot vekitzurim, abbreviations and acronyms. Pitgamim, sayings. Anashim, people. And katavot achonot, longer articles than just the headlines. Okay, so we're going to look at what we call the kotarot, the headlines. Koteret in Hebrew is the headline. This is obviously not a mainstream news source, but it is in the sense that it is reporting you the news in Ivrit Kala, in easy Hebrew. Excuse me just a second. Oh, I want to come? No. Okay. There it is. All right. So we're going to listen to it and go headline by headline. We're not going to have a vocabulary list necessarily for this piece. We are for a subsequent piece if we have enough time to go over it in today's class. So let's start.
בוקר טוב. היום יום שני, ז' באייר תשפ"ה, 5 במאי 2025. הנה הכותרות.
Okay, so all she's done up till now is narrate the date, right? Both the Hebrew calendar and the secular. Hine hakotarot. Here are the headlines. Okay, and so she's going to read each one, and you hear the pace. It is very slow.
אתמול בבוקר נפל בפעם הראשונה טיל מתימן בנמל התעופה בן גוריון. ראש הממשלה נתניהו ישראל תגיב על כך.
Okay. אתמול בבוקר, yesterday in the morning, נפל, fell, בפעם הראשונה, for the first time, טיל, a missile, מתימן, from Yemen, בנתב"ג. And you'll notice when she says, she doesn't say Natbag, she says the full title, בנמל תעופה Ben Gurion, right? In the Ben Gurion airport, right? We condense it into everyday Hebrew as Natbag because we love acronyms, as we've talked about before in Hebrew, but she says the full thing. ראש הממשלה נתניהו, ישראל תגיב על כך. Prime Minister Netanyahu, colon, just like in English headlines, colon indicates it's a direct quote. Israel tagiv al kach. Israel will respond to that. Okay, and then you notice here you have the option lakatava ha'mele'ah. For the full article, you click here. Obviously, we will send you this website. It is having some issues. We're already hearing of those of you who are not in Israel opening it, but we'll be sure to send it to you nonetheless. Okay, just 1 second. Next one.
אתמול היו הלוויות של שני הלוחמים מיחידת ההנדסה שנפלו בשבת בפיצוץ ברפיח.
Okay. Etmol, yesterday, hayu halvayot, there were halvayot funerals, shel shne halochamim, of the two soldiers, combatants. Mi yichidat handasa, yichida is a unit, handasa is engineering, so from the engineering unit, shenaflu b'Shabbat bepitzutz berafiach, that fell on Shabbat in an explosion in the city of Rafiach. Okay.
הקבינט אישר הלילה פה אחד את התוכנית להרחבת הלחימה בעזה.
Hakabinet isher halayla, the cabinet, hakabinet, meaning the cabinet of ministers that comprise the government, isher, approved, halayla, during the night, pe echad. Pe echad literally means one mouth, but it means unanimously, right? In one voice, approved, et hatochnit, the plan, leharchavat halechima ba'aza. Leharchava is the action of leharchiv. Leharchiv is to make something rachav yoter. Rachav is wide. So al-chava, widening, right? From the verb to widen, widening halechima ba'aza, the fighting in Gaza. Okay? One of the things about this website is that it'll often repeat the same topic again and again. Some days they have a lot of kotarot headlines, some they're very small. The next two are ones that are constantly repeated on this website.
צה"ל פועל בלבנון, בסוריה, בעזה וביהודה ושומרון. 59 חטופים מוחזקים בגיהנום בעזה כבר 577 יום. ככל הידוע, 24 מהם חיים.
Okay, so the ones that keep getting repeated, Sahal, the IDF, Israel's army, Poel is acting, is operating, Bilvanon in Lebanon, Besuria in Syria, Be'aza in Gaza, Uveyehuda v'Shomron. We've talked about this before. It's a very important point. Regardless of your ideology and your politics, and even the ideology of politics of the newscasters and the news organization, in Israel, we refer to what they call in English the West Bank as Yehuda v'Shomron. That is irrespective of politics and ideology. Okay? What people call the West Bank, which is the result of the armistice of after 1949. In Hebrew, we call Yehuda v'Shomron. That has to do with the areas in Jewish history in the land of Israel. Yehuda meaning where the tribe of Yehuda, Judah, sat, which was south of Jerusalem, so the lower half of that territory, and Shomron, Samaria, the northern part of that. Okay, that's how it's referred to in almost every mainstream news source in Israel, regardless of their ideology and your ideology. That's what it's called, Yehuda v'Shomron. Okay, and then the second one, 56 v'tisha chatufim, 59 of the hostages, the kidnapped, muchzakim, are being held בגיהינום בעזה, in the hell of Gaza, כבר 577 יום, for already 577 days. ככל הידוע, as much as known, 24 מהם חיים, 24 of them are alive. Okay. Next one.
אנשי משרד האוצר והסתדרות המורים הגיעו להסכם על שכר המורים. הלימודים יהיו היום כרגיל, כנראה, אך מורים רבים מתנגדים להסכם.
Okay, so another important thing that happened that wasn't necessarily covered outside of Israel. Anshe misrad ha'otzar. Anshe is the constructive form of the verb noun anashim, so the people of, or the staff of, misrad ha'otzar. We've talked about this before. Misrad means a government agency, a ministry. Otzar means treasure. So the Ministry of Treasure, the Ministry of Finance, right? Or the Treasury Ministry, as some countries will call it. Anshe Misrad HaOtzar, the staff of, or the people who comprise the staff of Misrad HaOtzar, the Finance Ministry, and who? Histadrut HaMorim, one of the two teachers' unions in Israel. This one is the primary schools. So V'Histadrut HaMorim, the teachers union, Higiu laheskem, arrived at a heskem agreement, al schar hamurim, for the regarding the salaries of teachers. Schar is salary, murim teachers. Halimudim yihiu hayom keragil. Classes today, lessons today, will be as usual, as normal. We've talked about that word ragil before. It means regular, just like it sounds like in English. Ragil means regular in Hebrew. Kanir'eh, as it seems. Ach, but morim rabim, many teachers, mitnagdim laheskem, are against the agreement, right? The proposal regarding their salary. Let's go to the next one.
ועדת השרים אישרה לקריאה טרומית את הצעת החוק שקוראת להעלות את השכר של חברי הכנסת והשרים.
Notice how she reads this one as opposed to the others. And notice what's different in this koteret, in this headline. Almost all the words have the dots and the bars that we know indicate vowel sounds, called nikud, right? She even pronounces it very differently, very, very correctly, very much according to the strict rules of Hebrew pronunciation and phonology. Because this sentence has a lot of words that if you're learning Hebrew, and this site is meant for people learning Hebrew, particularly adults, you're not learning these words, right? Here at Cafe Oleh, we are learning these words in other contexts when we talk about the news, like we're doing now. But if you're reading this for the first time, you don't necessarily know how to read these words, much less what they mean. And so it's important for Misrad HaChinuch, the Ministry of Education that runs this website, for you to know how to correctly pronounce this in order to figure out these words. So let's look at this sentence together. Va'adat hasarim, this is a construct noun or a compound noun because it's two nouns put together. And that word va'ada turns into va'adat. So we already know, according to the rules, and we've done this before regarding compound nouns, these two words are connected. So va'adat hasarim, the ministers' committee in the government, ishra, approved, likriyat tromit et hatzat hachok. Okay. Really quick lesson in parliamentarianism in Israel. There are two different ways to offer up a hatzat chok, a proposed law to turn into law. There are two different ways to issue them. One is a private way that an individual member of Knesset brings to the table, brings to the floor for vote, and the other is through a committee. Okay, and they both have their own different ways. Kriya Tormit is one of those two ways. Tormit is related to a word that I know many of you know, which is terem. Terem, many of you know, is the first not first aid, but urgent care network here in Israel, especially that's popular with tourists, that is before you go to a hospital, right? Terem means before. So it's the place you go before you go to a hospital where they decide if you actually need that or not, right? Sorry, just one second. Great. Okay. Likriat Toromit. Kriya means a calling or reading, right? In the Knesset, laws are passed after 3 readings. This one, being a Kriyat Tormit, is the first initial reading. You can read it, think of it as initial reading, right? The pre-reading, Kriyat Tormit. And then goes back to committee and then gets agreed upon, gets voted on at least 2 more times before it can come into law. Obviously, all those times it has to be with an approval. It has to be a majority of votes. Okay. So Vadat Sarim Ishra, the subcommittee of ministers, approved in a preliminary vote the Hatzat Chok, the law proposal that does what? שקוראת להעלות את השכר של חברי הכנסת והשרים. שקוראת, that calls for, just like that word קריאה, it's the same root, and it's the same, in fact, word. Kri'a is the act of doing something, the gerund, versus this is the actual verb, koret, calling. Okay? Leha'alot. We know this word because we just talked about it last week in the context of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And also, this is nefesh b'nefesh. You know the term aliyah, right? Well, this is the causative form of la'alot. Instead of to make aliyah, or to rise, because remember, la'alot means to ascend or to rise. Leha'alot is to cause something or someone to rise. In this case, what's being caused, what is being asked to rise up? Sachar shel chavrei haknesset v'asarim, the salaries of members of Knesset and ministers. Okay? And then finally,
אתמול, הצפות בדימונה ובירוחם ושיטפונות בנחלי הדרום, מאילת ועד עין גדי.
okay, אתמול, yesterday, הצפות בדימונה ובירוחם ושיטפונות בנחלי הדרום מאילת ועין גדי. We talked about the weather multiple times. We've talked about winter multiple times, and you can remember, maybe, if you've joined us before, the words hatzafot and shitfonot. In English, these are very similar. In Hebrew, because of Israel's unique geography, these are different words. Hatzafot are floods, right? And look at how these terms are used. Hatzafot are floods, and where do they occur? B'dimona uveyucham. Hatzafot, floods, only occur in places where there's not supposed to be flooding, typically built up areas. And that's why they mention the 2 cities of Dimona and Yerucham. Okay, so there was flooding in those 2 towns. Shitfonot benachale hadarom. Shitfonot, if hatzafot are floods, shitfonot are flash floods. What's the difference? Shitfonot take place in nature, in the desert, in the wilderness, right? In particular here, nachale hadarom. A nachal is a dry riverbed that typically floods or is filled with water seasonally, i.e. this time of year. Whereas we're starting to get out of the rainy season, right? That's the time that there would be shitfonot, flash floods, where it rains at one place, and because it's so dry, it quickly builds up into a flash flood. That's the difference between the 2 terms in Land of Israel terminology. Hatzafa is a flood that takes place in a populated area. A shitafon is a flood that takes place in a non-populated area that often is a flash flood. Okay, it's usually moving very fast, whereas a hatzafa is usually very stagnant water also. Me'elat, from Elat, ve'ad Ein Gedi, until Ein Gedi, aka midway through the Dead Sea. Okay, and then what she's going to do now is read a truncated version of the forecast.
התחזית מעונן חלקית וקריר עם גשם מקומי. יום שקט ובטוח, ישראל.
Right, she reads a truncated form of the weather. In Israel, the weather forecast always comes at the end of the broadcast. Unless there's something extraordinary happening with the weather, it's always at the end, just like she did now. And she says, Yom Shaket Uvatuach Israel. May you all have a quiet and safe day, Israel. Okay? That is how this website works. It is a daily digest of the headlines, which you can listen to. You can also read. And then if it's something big enough, it's going to have this katava mele'a for a full article. We're going to look at a full article from yesterday because to understand the news in Israel is also understand what people are talking about. Obviously, all the things that included here, the news that's breaking just in the last few minutes, where there's no lack of news. But what we're going to look at is one that happened just the other day, which is affecting a lot of people. And it's going to be the topic we're going to discuss on Wednesday, as well as if we have time, one more piece, which is this one. And this is a great illustration of the power of this website. Okay. So first off, we have the headline, Tzahal Hechal לשלוח עשרות אלפי צווי 8 לחיילי מילואים. If you don't understand any of that, great. Why? Because when you start to listen and read this, you'll understand why. Not only because there's a few words of English in here, the words that you may be new to you are highlighted, right? They have a hyperlink where you can click on it. For example, the word gvul. There's a pop-up window. It's not even to another window, another tab, right? It pops up in window and it tells you what the word is. Gvul, it tells you the word in English, how it's defined in Hebrew, and then it breaks down the word grammatically for you. This is a great, powerful resource to build up your vocabulary. Okay, and then there's a link at the bottom to get to the full list of all the words that are included on this website. Even if it doesn't have this hyperlink, you'll notice a lot of parentheses in this paragraph, what we call milchaot in Hebrew, because they're going to explain to you all the different things that are going on, right? So even if you don't listen to this, and we're going to listen to it first, and then we're going to read it, because to listen to it, you'll see whether or not she reads the parentheses. But you'll see that the parentheses really help define things in Hebrew while understanding the Hebrew.
צה"ל החל לשלוח עשרות אלפי צווי 8 לחיילי מילואים, שחלק גדול מהם יגויסו בפעם החמישית או השישית מאז תחילת המלחמה. חיילי המילואים יישלחו לגבול הצפון או ליהודה ושומרון, כדי להחליף שם את החיילים בשירות סדיר. חיילי הסדיר יישלחו לפעולה רחבה ברצועת עזה, שצפויה להתחיל בימים הקרובים.
Okay, 36 seconds to read that at a much slower tempo than how they would do on the news. But you'll notice, for those of you who have enough Hebrew to follow along, or you saw how fast I was with the mouse, she didn't read the parentheses because the parentheses are for you, the reader, to understand what the words she's talking about. So let's read this together to understand, because we already have a bunch of these at the beginning. Tzahal, Tzva Hagana Yisrael, the Israel Defense Forces. Hechel, and immediately we have a first parentheses, hitchil. If you don't know the word achel, you may know the word hitchil. In the parentheses, we're either getting an explanation or we're getting a synonym of the words that precede it. In this case, this word means begins, right? Because hitchil means it began. In this case, the IDF began doing what? Lishloach, sending asrot alfei, tens of thousands of what? Saveh shmone. And now you get an explanation of what Saveh Shmona is. Tzav Shmona, a singular one of these. Kriya lavo latzava achshav. Okay, Tzav is from the same root from which we get the word mitzvah, which, as hopefully you all know, is not a good deed. It means a commandment, right? It is not a good deed. It is a commandment. If you didn't know that, now you know. Tzav is an order. And order number 8 in the IDF, everyone knows this because of how many people serve, but also it's because the army has such an important contribution to Israeli society, it thus is known culturally, whether you served or not. Tzav Shmona is not just any call-up, it's an emergency call-up on Shiva October, on the 7th of October. that was the call up that many reservists got, and how many people quickly mobilized because they received a tzav shmone. Right? So order number 8 means kriya lavo latzava achshav, a call up to come to the army now. It really is an emergency and almost full call up. You can think of tzav shmone. Okay, means you need to show up within 24 hours, if even that much. Okay. So esrot alfei tzavei shmone, tens of thousands of these order 8s were sent out. L'chayalei miluim. Now, many of you already know what miluim are, and we've talked about this before, but now it's going to explain to you what they are. אזרחים אחרי שירות צבאי שמשרתים בצה"ל כחודש בשנה ובמלחמות. אזרחים, citizens, אחרי שירות צבאי, after their army service, שמשרתים, that serve, בצה"ל, in the army, כחודש בשנה ובמלחמות, approximately 1 month out of the year, and during wars. Okay? You're getting a definition in Hebrew of reserve duty, right? That's what miluim means. It means reserves. Lemale is to fill, and we're going to see why that word is used in a second. Shechelek gadol mehem, that a large amount of them, yeguisu, and now we have the term yeguisu. First off, if you press on it, you get an explanation of the words. But yeguyasu, right? Yigaisu otam, yikreu lahem lavo latzava, right? Yeguisu is the future passive tense form of the verb ligayes, to enlist. So will be enlisted, a large amount of them, right? As it says here, yigaisu otam, they will enlist them. They will be called to serve and come to the army. So many of these people who are being yeguisu, who are being enlisted, בפעם החמישית או השישית מאז תחילת המלחמה, for the 5th or 6th time during the war, since the beginning of the war. מאז תחילת המלחמה, since the beginning of the war. Okay, so this is the 5th and 6th call up to reserve duty. Many of these people who have just gotten the latest call up are doing. חיילי המילואים, reserve soldiers, ישלחו, again, future passive voice. Why is this used a lot? In just like in other languages, but particularly in Hebrew, in communications and especially in media, in newspapers, we use the passive voice a lot because in one word, we can say a lot at the same time, right? So these reserve soldiers will be sent, right? And it even explains it to you in the next parentheses. Yishlechu otam, the army will send them, but instead of saying the army will send them, we can simply say chayalei hamiluim yishalchu. These reserve soldiers will be sent lagvul, to the border. And there they give you the English, but not just any border, hatzafon, to the northern border, or leYuda v'Shomron. Remember what we just talked about before, to Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. You can make that distinction in English. In Hebrew, again, regardless of ideology, this is how we call that geographic region, Yehuda v'Shomron. Kidei, in order to, lehachlif. And again, a word that is that has an internal link, it's hypertext. And in the hyperlinked, excuse me, and then in the parentheses, lihiot bimkom, right? Lehachlif means liot bimkom. If you didn't know what lehachlif means, but you know lihiot means to be, and bimkom means instead of, right? You know that lehachlif means to exchange, to switch, right? In order to switch or exchange, sham et hachayalim b'sherut sadir. Okay, so you're not just switching, you're not just going to these places, you're switching out chayalim, soldiers, in what? Sherut sadir. What is sherut sadir? It's going to tell you what it is. צעירים מגיל 18 שמשרתים בצבא. Tzirim, young people, מגיל 18, from the age of 18, שמשרתים בצבא, that serve in the army. In the army, there are three different categories of service. סדיר, Keva and Miluim. We've just talked about Miluim, right? Those אזרחים אחרי שירות צבאי שמשרתים בצה"ל כחודש בשנה ובמלחמות, according to this article, right? Those citizens after their army service who serve approximately a month a year and during wars. We just now learned about שירות סדיר, צעירים מגיל 18 שמשרתים בצבא, right? Young people from the age of 18 who serve in the army. שירות סדיר is the mandatory conscription. And then the third one, which isn't covered here, is Keva. Keva is career service in the army. Think high-ranking officers, the chief of staff, and that entire branch of the IDF, senior officials and captains and so forth. Okay, that's Keva. It's your career. It's neither mandatory conscription nor is it reserve duty. Okay. חיילי הסדיר, conscripted soldiers, ישלחו, that word again, will be sent, לפעולה רחבה, for wide activity, ברצועת עזה, in the Gaza Strip, שצפויה, another word that's about to be translated for us, תהיה כנראה, that will be apparently, okay, it's a nice way to say it. תהיה כנראה will apparently be. צפויה means expected, right? שצפויה, that is expected. להתחיל, that word again, to begin. בימים הקרובים, in the upcoming days. Okay, so even if that was a lot of Hebrew for you, even if that was very difficult for you, it's helping you get used to the sound of Hebrew through the narrator. And it's trying to use Hebrew to teach you Hebrew, which is a very common tactic in not just in other languages as well, and certainly in Hebrew, right? They're translating the word for you by using Hebrew that you may already know. And the words you may not know either come in English, like gvul, border, or they come with a hyperlink that if you click on it, you get a full understanding of it, at least as much as Hebrew can afford it. Okay, look, it even talked about here, as I clicked on Miluim, it gives you the whole thing. שירות חובה or סדיר, שנתיים לנשים ושלוש שנים לגברים. 2 years for women and 3 years for men. שירות קבע, what I just explained to you, that they have it here. עבודה קבועה בצה"ל. Fixed work, meaning that is your job, בצה"ל, in the army. And then שירות מילואים, that we already talked about. Okay, this is a great, powerful resource, even though not so much color, not as many pictures as it used to have, but it's a great resource nonetheless in practicing your Hebrew and more importantly, making the news accessible to you. Because even though these are today's digest of articles, some of us may not have time to read the news all the time. It may be overwhelming for us. It's not just a lot of Hebrew, it's a lot of emotion, right? Last year and a half has proven it's not easy to follow the news, and that's not just because of the Hebrew. So this is a healthier, perhaps for some of us, way to digest the news through a digest. Before I get to your questions and talk about Wednesday's classes, I want to give you a preview of what we're going to talk about on Wednesday, but I'm also going to share this article is from another news source. So we talked about Hadshon, which is a great and powerful resource. We've also, through our media literacy classes, explored other mainstream news sources, and that's emphasis is on mainstream. We will always cover mainstream sources. This is one of the most important ones in the last, let's say, 15 years. Okay, and this is Israel Hayom. Israel Hayom started out as a free daily tabloid newspaper in Israel. It was print, it was for free. It did not exist before in Israel. A daily newspaper that was tabloid size, that's what we call the size, that doesn't mean the style of writing, that was free and was handed out on street corners everywhere in Israel. And it caused a huge scandal for two reasons. One, the biggest news outlet at that time was the print Yediot Ahronot, right, which is still one of, if not the second biggest news source in Israel. And it was always print, and it was always for pay. And now comes this upstart. That's the word. That's free. And it was also because Yisrael Hayom's major financial backer at the time was the late philanthropist Sheldon Adelson. Um, well, his wife is Israeli, he himself is not, and he was paying to make this circulate. And so there were accusations that the news was biased in favor of the government at the time. Also, Prime Minister Netanyahu was in charge at that time because the two were close friends. And so there was a lot of concern that this style of writing, because it was free, was also going to be of lesser value. And also because the person who was helping fuel it, even though it was a for-profit publication, it had ads and so forth, was advancing the government's agenda. And so there was a lot of uh, controversy over it at the time. It's subsequently come online, as you see here. Other newspapers have tried to have a free daily print as well, but almost everything is now digital nowadays. And Israel Hayom very much is in competition with another news source we've looked at before, Walla. Walla is the biggest online news source, and it's only online, it's only digital. Israel Hayom, Israel Today, is on both print and digital. And listen to the name, Yisrael Hayom, Israel Today. It very much sees itself as the USA Today of Israel. What is USA Today? With all due respect to people who read it, it is trying to get to the vast majority of Americans, regardless of their opinions or educational background. So it's very, oftentimes very simplistic language. It's the same thing here. It is not high level. It has subsequently changed. Israel Hayom has become more critical than it was in years past of the government. It's more nuanced in its approach. And this came up in the context of what we just talked about, that longer article about Miluim, right? About Army service. And we're just going to read the headline, and that's is going to be part of the homework, but as well as people who join on Wednesday. Likrat od sevev gius. Likrat is the same word as lifnei, so before. Od sevev, another od sevev, round of gius, conscription, meaning of miluim. Lochem im sak deagot al hagav. Lochem, a fighter, a warrior, a soldier. Im, with sak deagot, a sack of worries. Al hagav, on his back. Hu lochem pachot tov, is a soldier, a fighter, but is pachot tov, less good. Okay, that's the title. And what is this about? This is a column written by someone who's been called up again for reserve duty and talking about the impact it has not just on him, but on the people around him. Okay. And that's a very important conversation that's taking place in Israel right now, because as we just read, this is now the fifth or sixth time many of the people who are being called up have been called up since October 7th. It is a long war. And so this article talks about the impact it's having on all of them. So what we're going to do on Wednesday's class is, as we often do with media literacy, we create civil and civic conversation around difficult topics. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to help translate parts of that article with you, and I'm going to send it out already. So it'll be ready for you to start looking at in the next day or so. On Wednesday, we're going to use that article and the larger and the more general one we read through Hadshon to talk about the issue that's happening right now of many people being conscripted again and developing not only our opinions about it, but how to voice our opinions in a civil and civic manner, as we often try to do here, to model good conversation and good citizenship as olim, as people who've taken upon citizenship on themselves. Okay, that's going to be for Wednesday's class. You're going to get not just the link to Hadshon, and if it doesn't work, I will screenshot it and send it to you as a PDF, as well as that article from Israel Hayom, which you should be able to get anywhere. I will help you with the vocabulary on it so you can read it together, as well as framing some questions for you to ask in your breakout rooms according to your proficiency level about what that article means, what it means to you, what it means to Israeli society. Okay. With that, I want to start answering some questions in the Q&A. Is there a site in English where one can go and learn about the political parties and what they stand for, and also to learn about how the elections work? I'm finding that I do not know where to look, and I'm looking for something like a non-partisan breakdown of who is what. Great question. So first off, that's what Cafe Oleh is for. We've done several classes, not just on elections, as they've happened several times in our 7+ years of being together, but we also have a whole class on a non-political politics class where we talk about what are the different terminology goes and the basic way that elections work and the Knesset works. So number one, we have that class. Number two, there are a number of other great resources online. One is through the Israel Democracy Institute. Another one, and please don't come after me in the comments, folks, but Wikipedia is not a bad entity in its entirety. And I know that because its articles on the Israeli political system are fabulous. Many of them are locked. They can't be edited for bias, in other words, edited with bias in them. And they have some great research that's gone into them. And even if they have problematic things, you always go to the bibliography, and they have great resources there. So I do recommend the articles on the Israeli political system on Wikipedia, which obviously are in English. Is Chadshon written at the third grade level? If you know, I don't know. They simply call it Ivrit Kala. And as we saw in the things that they're describing to you, it's written in mind for adults. Okay, and that's why the topics that are covered are for adults, and they're not presuming, for example, a small child, by a third grader, they will know what miluim are. They're not presuming you as an Oleh Chadash or Olah Chadasha will know what miluim are, and that's why they described it out. I wondered, is that an AI generated voice? No, it is not. The woman who had been reading it for years, neither was as well. I will say that there's a strong pushback, and I say this personally as someone who has been teaching this for 7+ years, not to rely on AI when learning a language, because the nuances, the idiomatic expressions, the emphases on the syllables, we're going to have a whole class in the summer session on pronunciation. AI simply can't catch up with quite yet, but great question. Can Chadshon only be used in Israel? Suddenly, I cannot get the link to work in the USA and won't be back in Israel. Like I said before, there are some kinks with it. If it's not working, it's one of many resources you'll have. And certainly for those of you joining Wednesday's class, you will get a screenshot of it so you can access it as well. But I know that they are trying to make it, they're renovating it for the last few months. I don't know the status beyond that. Okay. Is there another word for people who volunteer for the army, i.e. from other countries? Great question. There used to be a program, and it still exists, but it's not nearly as active as it once was, called Machal. It does exist, I believe, but not nearly in the same amount. There is another program um, called Garin Sabar. Garin Sabar is not quite the same thing because it's not volunteering. Garin Sabar is a program which Nefesh B'Nefesh works with, in which people who are still eligible for Sherut Sadir, remember that conscripted service, to make Aliyah and to be in a um, program that not only helps them make Aliyah, but also prepares them to get ready for military service shortly upon arriving in Israel. Beyond that, Machal is the next one that's existed for many years, which allowed people to volunteer in the army doing very serious service, not necessarily combat service, but very much. The other one that many of you are probably familiar with is Sarel. Sarel is a volunteer service that allows volunteers from around the world to help with things behind the scenes, like logistics, like packing, like things like that. Obviously not, again, combat service per se. If one were to speak in casual conversation using the language of Chadshon, would you sound too high? Great question. Um, the language of Chadshon is very mainstream Hebrew. It's neither high or low. It is very everyone can understand it. It's not using idiomatic expressions. It's not using a lot of in-speak, right? So you saw how much it had to write out in Hebrew to ensure that everyone has accessibility and understands what's going on. And the language that they're using is not very high-level Hebrew. So it's very accessible to all sorts of people. Did the recording of the news read out each letter of the Hebrew year? Because I hear Israelis vocalize the Hebrew word as a year as a word. Are both acceptable, or do we sound like newcomers if we recite each letter? It's both. You'll see she said Taf Shin Pe Hey. That's the normal way you say it. Normal. You will hear people say the just as we talked about acronyms in Hebrew, that often they turn into words and they say it as a word. You will hear people say it. When we talk about pronunciation in a few weeks' time, we're going to talk about how that can be difficult because of, for example, the loss of differences in modern Hebrew of between the letters Aleph, Hey, and Ayin. All three have different sounds. And if you're reading it out as a word and you don't enunciate, you won't necessarily know the difference between Aleph and Hey. If you know how letters turn into numbers, you know that it can't end with an ayin, but nonetheless, usually you'll say each letter out to ensure you know the actual date. Where can we get help with common contractions? We've talked about that before. We've had a whole class on acronyms and abbreviations. So youtube.com, Cafe Oleh, acronyms and abbreviations, or even some combination of those words, you'll get to a great lesson we've done on that before. And we'll continue to do that again in the summer session as well. So another great reason to stay tuned and sign up for our summer classes. Does lone soldier apply to this subject about immigrants who come to Israel by themselves? A lone soldier is of two categories. When we say lone soldier, as olim, we automatically assume that that means someone who makes aliyah by themselves, doesn't have a family here, and thus doesn't have the family support that the vast majority of Israeli soldiers have, for example, on weekends, for example, doing laundry or having a break because they've been in service for so long. That's a typical lone soldier, and it comes with certain benefits. A lone soldier, and the reason why I framed it like that is because a lone soldier is not just an Oleh or an Olah. A lone soldier is someone who does not have family to support them. That's the definition of a chayal boded, as we say in Hebrew, or a chayelet bodeda, meaning you can be a native Israeli and socioeconomically or ideologically, for example, if your family is against you serving in the military, or your family can't support you on the weekends or do your laundry or do things like that, you can also get the chayal boded status. And that's very important for many people in Israel. For example, if you are Haredi soldier, and your family is against you serving, you don't have a place to go to for Shabbat. You don't have a place to go home when you have a break. There are many organizations that deal with and help out Chayalim Bodedim that are not Olim, because there are many other soldiers who aren't Olim, but are considered Chayalim Bodedim. It's an important question. Thank you for asking. Okay. To what extent is the Hebrew calendar used versus the English calendar in everyday life? Great question. On news sources, news resources will always have both Hebrew and English. On official documents, it will always have both. We use both on a regular basis. That's the easiest way to say it. Many things are guided by the Gregorian calendar, the civil calendar, as we call it in Hebrew, because we're part of the world and its systems. But things that have to do with, excuse me, official documents, holidays, things like that, will always have the Hebrew calendar as well. Okay. Great. As a reminder, folks, this media literacy, we cover many different news resources and news agencies. We're going to obviously cover more in the future. Hadshon is a great one because it's particularly for us in mind. Those of us who are learning Hebrew, Ivrit Kala in easy Hebrew. If you're using an app, it will not have the ability to translate into English. It's for a native Israeli speaker, regardless of what channel you have. Hadshon is a great one for those of you in Israel. Hopefully, it will start working for those of you abroad as well. We've also covered many other ones in the past.